anything is interesting if done right. Like, and I'm sure it's a very fascinating documentary. My point is, why?
Hello, you are listening to Off Radar, It's a Movie podcast. I'm James Smith, a professional film and video editor.
I'm James Eatock, a freelance writer and illustrator specialising in 1980s cartoons.
And I'm Neil Brock, aka Nige, the man with two names, former film journalist and currently working in the games industry.
Each week, one of us picks a movie that all three of us either haven't seen in many years or in some cases haven't seen at all.
We each watch the chosen movie, return to the microphone and let you all know exactly what we thought of it.
I'd never really had any interest in watching it and I was proved absolutely right.
I think it's amazing. I really, really love this film.
The film's still a pile of steaming dog shit.
If you fancy joining in and suggesting a movie for us to watch, why not tweet us at Off Radar Podcast
or email us on offradarpod@gmail.com.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, share, and by all means, leave a review.
For now, strap in, turn the volume up, and let's go Off Radar. Hello. Welcome back. Happy Halloween. And welcome.
Ooh, I've turned into Nige.
I thought you were just booing him for a second there. Oh, it's James Smith again. Boo.
Oh, I haven't even said that yet, but I am.
He's like The Walking Dead, isn't he?
Harsh.
Jesus. And yeah, I am James Smith, and I am joined by James Eatock.
Hello.
And Neil Brock. Is there a fly? There's something in the room. Oh. Is it? I think it's a bee. Don't worry.
Yeah, it was a bee. Actually,
imagine if this film was called Bee. That would have been different.
It'd have been very different, Smith.
Would have. I would have quite liked to see that transformation. There you go.
Go and check out the Bee movie with Jerry Seinfeld.
Bee.
Yeah, Seinfeld
or Rowan Atkinson, Man vs. Bee.
Man vs. I forgot about that. It came out a few years ago.
Which is, yeah, it's like Mr. Bean basically, but with a bee. But it's quite funny.
That sounds rubbish.
So Mr. Bean. Okay. Right,
yeah. But anyway, today we're talking about not Mr. B, The Fly, which came out in 1986. This was actually recommended by an old work colleague of ours, James Eatock.
No, I'm James Eatock.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you recommend this? Oh my God.
It's almost like grammar
so
failed
sneaky.
You
are like, oh, remember me? I'm James Eatock, your old work colleague.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you are on the podcast.
Who am I?
James Eatock, the person that's on our podcast every week.
I need to put comments into conversation. You can guess. I'll probably delete it, but...
Oh, Colin Blake.
No, you always go for that. No.
Do I really?
No. Yeah.
Colin Blake, you only ever guess that if it's Rush Hour or like, what other films right up his street? Rush Hour 2.
No, all I'll say is, yeah, this man is a big fan of the podcast.
It's Fairless.
It's not Fairless, but big fan of the podcast. He's listens a lot. He's been in touch. You've even
Chris Kiernan.
Not quite. You've worked for him, James Eatock.
Andrew Harvey?
It's Bobby Tubbs, Simon Tubbs.
Oh, B to the T.
So Simon is an old work colleague. He used to work with us, obviously. And yeah, he's actually given us a couple of questions for us to discuss. So I must remember to do those as we do it. Like a couple of discussion points, which is quite
You're not interesting enough. Talk about what I want you to talk
exactly.
about. Yeah, man.
Gentlemen, I'd like you to answer the meaning of life. And it's like, Bobby, this is a bit hard. It's a bit tricky.
Yeah, and the film was directed by David Cronenberg. Fans of Cronenberg, you two? Or not?
I wouldn't say I'm a fan of his work, but I know of his work, and whenever I've caught it, I enjoy it. Put it that way. So I'm not outwardly like, oh, Cronenberg, not like I'm with Scorsese or Tarantino or someone.
Yeah.
It's weird. I'm a really big fan, but I've not watched loads of his films. I remember watching Shivers years ago and being a huge fan of that. Scanners as well was a bit of a cult one when I was younger. Like Videodrome, I only watched for the first time a few years back. And then some of his more recent stuff like Existence and A History of Violence and Eastern Promises especially. Yeah. He's done a lot with old, what's his face, Viggo Mortensen recently as well. It's a bit of a...
I didn't know he did A History of Violence.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a really interesting film.
And The Dead Zone as well. I should mention The Dead Zone because The Dead Zone is absolutely brilliant. So,
all right.
And that's a really good Halloween-y type film as well with Christopher Walken in.
Okay. I don't feel like I've seen that much. I think I saw Scanners around the time of getting into filmmaking and watching films, and everyone just wanted to see the exploding head.
Yeah, I was going to say that was my only experience with Scanners was on my Amiga A500. Used to get you send off for demo discs, like a 1 megabyte demo disc, and you put it in a computer. Bear in mind, this was the 1989, 1990, and so you could only fit so much on a disc, and especially with animations, like a digitized sequence would be about 2 seconds of footage, but it would blow your mind because you'd see something digitized on screen,
right? Yeah,
it was just the exploding head, that's all it was, but it was just that one clip, and it would just loop forever, but you just watch it being like, look at the quality of the graphics, and wow, what was this from? Because it doesn't even say this is from Scanners. It's just
And I've never seen Videodrome. Still,
I have. I saw that.
It's kind of been on the list, but I've just never felt like I'm in the right mood for it. But hey, after watching The Fly, maybe I should be. And written by George Langeleen. There's a funny name. Charles Edward Pogue and Cronenberg as well. So a writing credit.
Cronenberg actually rewrote most of it. So in the end, I think they only used a really limited amount from the other writers. He went away and changed a lot of it. It's based on an original film from the 50s as well.
Of course.
That had Vincent Price in and stuff. But in that film, the kind of difference was, I've never seen it, but my understanding is that he sort of goes in a teleporter and immediately becomes a fly. Obviously, in this film, a lot of it is about the slow transformation, but
the original. I've seen bits of the original over the years, and it is very much the instant transformation. And it's not a case of they merge; it's a case of they swap pieces. So in other words,
there's a head, doesn't he?
There's a head and an arm. So the famous end scene of the original Fly is him in the spider's web going, "Help me!" and he's like a fly, but with a man's head and a man's arm.
Yeah.
And he's about to be eaten by a spider, and then Vincent Price. No, the other guy just crushes him with a rock. That takes care of him. That's my Vincent Price line.
Wow.
That was a thriller.
There you go.
Yeah.
And it stars Jeff Goldblum, who we spoke about very recently in our Jurassic Park episode.
Yeah.
Geena Davis and John Getz. Johnny Getz.
Johnny Getz.
Johnny Getz.
J to the motherfucking G.
JG. I guess, starting point. Had we seen this before Bobby had recommended it for us to watch for the pod?
I'd never actually seen it. I'd never actually seen it. It's one of those things where I'd seen bits of it. So it was one of those where I knew, I'd seen him, in his malformed form. But I didn't know the structure of the movie. And did I know the ending? Yeah, I think I did know the ending, but I when I was watching it this afternoon, I was like, "Oh, I have seen this bit before." So
Nigel, you must have seen this.
Yeah, I remember watching it late night, maybe like a BBC One, possibly on my old small little TV in my bedroom when I was growing up as a wee nipper. Again, probably too young to be watching this film, but I had very fond memories of it from those times. And there's a couple of scenes specifically that I'm sure we'll get onto that. Yeah, well, I'll probably remember till the day I die, I think, when it comes to this film. One of which I believe was inspired by the Sylvester Stallone film Over the Top. So there you go.
We will get to that. And Over the Top, which came... probably after. Maybe Over the Top was inspired by
Cronenberg. Yeah, there's a film later.
It was 1987. 1987. That's always like Stallone. He's right on the pulse, isn't he? 1 year later, he's like,
wow.
Bang.
Oh, okay. So it's just
so
1 year after The Fly. Weirdly, I'm kind of in the middle of you guys. I did not see it back in the day, but I have seen it. I probably saw it at around 24, 25-ish. So not young by any means, but just when probably our other work colleague John Drabble was like, "What? You haven't seen The Fly? Go and watch The Fly!" And then I had to go and watch The Fly that evening. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to right back to work.
They wouldn't let you
openly mocked.
Yes, would be sacked immediately. And Nigel, I asked you to do a little synopsis of this bad boy. What's this about?
He's going to put fly puns in it. There's going to be fly puns.
You set me up now, and I've not done that at all. I have, first time ever, written down my synopsis, so allow me to read it out to you.
Please do.
Boy meets girl, boy transports stocking, girl chooses boy over possessive ex, boy transports self plus fly, boy's penis falls off. The end. So there you go.
Wait, I mean, that's brilliant, but does his penis fall off?
Yeah, don't you like? So there's a scene after all his bits are falling off, and he opens like the bathroom cabinet.
Yeah, and you see the ear,
and you see his penis.
I didn't see that.
I missed that as well.
Oh, come on, go back and
both
watch.
watches.
That's like the most memorable bit. Well, it's not the most memorable bit, but it's a very memorable bit.
Human teleportation, molecular decimation, breakdown, and reformation is inherently purging.
Where our greatest creations meet our deepest fears.
Something went wrong, Seth. When you went through, something went wrong.
You are about to go beyond that limit.
It was listed as like a horror, thriller, romance. It's like, huh? Okay.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah.
No, I get that. The romance is strong in it.
Yeah.
They should have had the tagline, "Could a woman ever love a fly?" That would have been a good tagline for the movie.
Well, the tagline, I guess, is a good starting point, isn't it?
What is the tagline?
Be afraid, be very afraid, which she says in the film, and it feels very out of place in the scene because it's like someone just kind of like says it to get the tagline, to get it on the movie poster.
Well, it ties in very early in terms of one of the bits of trivia. Now, one of the main producers, and really the main reason why this film got made in the first place, because the idea of this was kind of suggested to one of the major studios. They were happy to do it. Then it kind of fell apart when aspects of the script got sorted out. So they had to go and secure independent funding. Lo and behold, Mel Brooks stepped up and he provided the funding for this film, albeit was sort of pretty determined not to have his name on the film, because you look at the film and it's like a Mel Brooks production.
Yeah,
what
you
do you
don't
expect it to be?
yeah.
Well, they were discussing the aspect of like, how should a character react to like seeing these stages of Seth Brundle's transformation. He just came out and said, be afraid, be very afraid. And lo and behold, that became not only in the film, it's one of the most famous lines in cinema history.
I'm afraid!
Don't be afraid!
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
So Jeff Goldblum obviously starts off in this film as this nerdy scientist. He's quite kind of bumbly and awkward, and kind of his eyes are a little bit kind of on edge. He looks a bit on edge.
He looks like Jeff Goldblum.
He does look a bit like Jeff Goldblum. Yeah,
he's perfectly cast. Yeah, perfectly cast. No, seriously, perfectly cast.
I think you're making a mistake. I think you really want to talk to me.
Sorry, I have 3 other interviews to do before this party's over.
Yeah, but they're not working on something that'll change the world as we know it.
Even his clothes, he's got the same suit that he wears pretty much every day. It's quite a good gag. And
like The Simpsons. I swear The Simpsons did a very similar one.
They have, haven't they? Because yeah, exactly. Homer wears the same clothes every day, as it's renowned for. But yeah, this film is obviously about the transformation of his character into a fly, as Nye just said. And I guess before we get there, it's really incredible, the actual contraption, the telepod thing, which, you know, I've watched Family Guy a few times recently, and, you know, it's something they rip off all the time in it, and it feels like I haven't seen this film in a long time, I might add, 20 years, but it felt like so familiar, and I feel like it's just kind of been done a lot since.
Dude, like the 3 or 4 years after this, if you want to talk about the actual story, Ninja Turtles did it, where they turned Baxter Stockman. Krang decides, it's correct for a kid's cartoon, it's pretty shocking. Like, Shredder throws Baxter Stockman through this dimensional port to Dimension X in order to get Bebop and Rocksteady out of Dimension X. It's like, you know, trade. So Baxter Stockman ends up in Dimension X, and Krang decides, I'm going to execute him, send him to the disintegrator. And Baxter Stockman goes in this device, and he's like, it's really horrible. He's like, please, like banging on the glass. And a fly that followed him through the gate lands on him as he's being disintegrated, and he turns into Baxter Stockman the fly. And then one of the episodes where he returns many episodes later, many seasons later, it was like they took the piss out of the sequel of this movie and called it like Return of the Son of the Fly Part 2, something like that. It was like a really nice gag. But yeah, it's the whole. I think this film really did put this idea in people's heads of like really the whole teleportation thing, but also the amalgamum, is that the right word? Amalgam of like amalgamation of putting two things together to form something else. And like you say, in terms of those pods, that is like the key structure, because I think without that you could still tell the story, but it's so key of like, because it whittles it down to the most simplest thing of here's one thing, we need to get it over there. And there's a computer. I like the computer as well at the screen when he's tapping on the keyboard. There's kind of all these little things and stuff.
I thought that as well. It looked, even though it was obviously set in 1984 and it was released in 86, sorry, and was very much a contemporary film. It reminded me so much of the film Aliens and all like the sort of computer text and stuff you see in that. It's very, very similar. And they were eventually actually released as almost like a double bill, those two films, that people, you know, in the days when they used to do kind of back-to-back films with a intermission and stuff, that's what they would do. But yeah, like the set design, like he's living in this almost like warehouse where his lab is, but they look so good, the pods. And I think if it had been something like really simplistic or almost like a guy behind a sheet type stuff, it would have been really cheap, but it actually gives it a lot of gravitas. You actually think, wow, this is something that could actually work, that does actually work.
Those weird hairs that were growing out of your back, I had them analyzed, but they were definitely not human.
If you saw how scared and angry and desperate he is.
I'm sure Typhoid Mary was a very nice person too when you saw her socially.
No!
You're afraid to be destroyed and recreated, aren't you?
You're changing, Seth. Everything about you is changing.
And the fact that he's actually, like you say, it feels like he's slumming it as well in this warehouse. You know, it is really grimy and like kind of rough. But then these pods, like, you know, are futuristic, and the machine, and there is something so intelligent about this character, despite he's kind of struggling, really, I guess, with this incredible idea.
Well, that's the thing. It's like he's got one sole purpose. He's not worried about like making his bed or having a nice living room. Yeah. It's just everything has been, for almost his life, focused on this one thing, this teleportation device.
You both kind of touched on it. One thing I really liked about it was when, and it's great because by having her character as a journalist, what that does is you create immediate exposition. So in other words, if it was like, if they were already together in a relationship, it would be really weird if he suddenly started spouting, here's how I got to this point. By having her introduced, that's one thing I loved about this film, straight in. We're straight in at the party.
There's no messing about it.
Meeting them, and it's like, here we go. And within 20 minutes, we already know the premise, the setup, his character, how he got to this point. And one of the things I really like is when he's talking, she goes, how did you do this? And he's like, well, you know, I don't build this. I get these really clever people, and so, you know, obviously he's a genius, but they do all the kind of, you know, assembling different parts, and then I just bring them all together. And I was like, I do like that because he knows how to make this work, but he sends like the tech building out to all these different companies and people, and they don't know what it's for. So he'll say to them, build me like I'm making this up now, like a laser generator. And they're like, yeah, sure. They'll send that over, and he'll say to someone, build me a flux capacitor.
I knew you were going to say flux capacitor.
I just suddenly, do you know what? I didn't until I actually said it. But like, imagine, Matt, there's a great crossover. Imagine he looks at a bit of paper and you see Dr. What was his name? Doc Brown.
Emmett Brown, come on.
Emmett Brown. Imagine if like you saw a piece of paper and like, crossover.
So he teleports back in time, turns into a fly, and ends up in 1985.
No, I think he just has a sketch of a flux capacitor. Let's not go too crazy.
Okay,
bring us back to reality. Come on.
But yeah, I do. Yeah, the reality of this sci-fi film.
And then what's really interesting after that is obviously she's got this huge story. She writes for like a science journal or magazine or newspaper or whatever it is. She goes to her editor, who also happens to be like her jilted ex. So obviously there's already a bit of tension there. But he just completely blows her off. And it's like, well, that's nonsense. It's impossible. That isn't happening. He just did like a parlor trick where he just sort of went from one place to another. It was sort of piece of piss.
Like the Prestige. I think the other important thing with her character is she is in contrast to him a little bit at the beginning. She's a very strong character, strong female character in this film. She's very confident. She stands up to her ex. You see that kind of the weird dynamic between these two play out throughout the whole film. Obviously, as he transforms more into a fly, it becomes like slightly odd. But Geena Davis in this role is such a good, strong female lead, I guess, going up against Jeff Goldblum.
Well, and as well, it was one of her first, it was more or less her breakthrough film. I think she was in almost like a bit part in Tootsie, the sort of Dustin Hoffman film from sort of previously. But she was in a relationship with Jeff Goldblum at the time of The Fly, and they kind of more or less got each other the roles for this film. And then after this, she went on to obviously have a lot more success. But I think being someone who, I mean, she's quite tall for a start. She's got a history of playing quite strong women in film. I think in this, some people have criticised The Fly before for the tone shifting quite a bit, and she does have moments of, like, as you say, like where she's very strong and sort of determined and stands up to people, but she has moments where perhaps she's written slightly differently or reacts in shock. But I mean, it's such an extreme thing. How could you not react to some of the stuff she sees? But yeah, I agree. I think they're just, the chemistry between them's really strong. I mean, they were married for 2 years as well, her and Jeff Goldblum. Wow. So it's just like there was clearly that sort of chemistry, and I think that very much comes across on the film itself. So. And
is it obviously with the you know, we've kind of touched on the pod and stuff. The first things we're seeing is him like basically experimenting before he goes into it. And I mean, one of the most shocking moments in the film is when the baboon goes in there and comes out the other side as this kind of complete
inside out creature.
It's like The Thing, isn't it? It's kind of that kind of gore, kind of grotesque.
Put it this way, like I was going to watch this before I had lunch, and then I realised, and then I was like, no, it's Cronenberg. I thought, honestly, and I got up to a point when he was about to do that experiment, I thought, I'll have my lunch and then I'll come back to it. So I did, because I was like, I do not want to be put off my food. And sure enough, I played the scene, and then it's like, it's like inside out, and it's like, oh, that's grim.
Well, it's interesting actually, like Jeff Goldblum wrote a letter to Vincent Price actually, sort of after this film was released, and said to him, basically, I hope you liked this film as much as I liked yours, obviously referring back to the 50s, The Fly. And Price was touched by the letter and sort of composed a reply basically saying that he went to see the film. He thought it was wonderful right up to a certain point. And it went a little bit too far. And I feel like it's, for some people, certainly of a certain sensitivity, there's so much in this. And to be honest, there was even more that was left on like the
really?
Room floor. Oh man, there's some absolutely insane.
Well, the stocking was inside out, and it was like
exactly. Wow, I just tried to strangle him. But no, there was a few different scenes, and there was one quite famous scene that was cut from this. Basically, what's infamously known, I think, as the cat monkey scene, where he fuses a cat and a baboon together, because obviously as the film goes on, he's obviously been turned into, he's half man, half fly, he's slowly changing, he's trying to experiment to figure out a way to reverse it. So he gets a cat and a baboon and kind of merges them together, and they come out and basically attack him, and he has to like beat it to death with a stick. And basically,
sounds like something out of a Michael Bay movie.
Well, it does sound quite exciting, and you can actually find the clip on YouTube as well. But essentially,
I've just seen. I'm looking at images of it. Oh,
yeah, mutilated creature that he then beats to death. They actually did it in like one of the screenings. So obviously, they have test screenings. They were big things in the 80s, and apparently, like, everyone in the audience completely lost sympathy for the character at that point, because like no matter who you are, how good a character you've been, you beat a like cat monkey to death with a stick, suddenly your sympathy's gone a little bit. But there was even worse scenes. There was a scene that was written but wasn't filmed, where he's outside like eating out of a dustbin, an old lady comes on and he just basically vomits on her face and her face melts and stuff like that. So there was quite a lot in this film that could have been severely worse. And that's not to say there isn't a lot of gore, but I think they created a lot of almost like creatures and different things, and they tried so much, and some of it just didn't work, and some of it that does, certainly for the 80s, and the fact a lot of it was prosthetics, no CGI, still stands up today, I would say, although some of it makes him look like just someone who's been stung by too many like bees or something like that.
Well, no, I was going to say, like, going back to what you were just saying, knowing this was a Cronenberg movie and having seen sort of like Videodrome and other things, I went in thinking, oh, this is going to be way more kind of gory and like. So I was expecting more experimentation. When it was just the baboon turned inside out, I was like, oh, is that it? And then he's like straight into becoming the Fly. So I was expecting, so that doesn't surprise me, like you say, with the face melting and this, that, and the other. But yeah, I was expecting a lot more gore. And don't get me wrong, they do a great job when he slowly, when he transitions to the Fly. But it was not as much as like I've seen in kind of other Cronenberg films.
Yeah, there's a build, and I think that's really important in this film, that his transformation as a character and actor is so crucial, that it's not, like you say, just coming out the machine and being a Fly. Actually, this film I don't think it would have worked as well. So the fact that he becomes more muscular and strong and acrobatic, and then also he's now really confident, he talks faster. It's like some of the more subtle things to begin with.
He gets addicted to sugar and chocolate bars as well, and he marathon sex sessions. It's just...
and some of that you're like, okay, is a Fly all of those things? I don't know, but it's kind of pushing, like, it's kind of like, basically creating this, well, it's like a kind of, superhero or villain or whatever, it's kind of on the edge of Spider-Man or something. So when you see him slowly become that, you really invest in this transformation, because, like we say, we saw him as this nerdy scientist just half an hour ago. And then that makes the gory and the, those kind of more hard to watch scenes that bit more impactful later on, like some of which I had forgotten about, and I was like, oh god, that is pretty vile even now.
I said earlier, didn't I, about some of the films, some of the scenes rather, that I think I'll remember until the day I die, and the most specific one that we referenced in terms of over the top is like the infamous arm wrestling scene in a bar. And I've got a feeling I'd seen The Fly a few times on TV where this scene was cut, and even watching it back quite recently, obviously for this, I couldn't look at the screen before it happened. I just heard the crack.
I had to look away. Yeah,
it's just, I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming.
I knew it was coming. Like, again, I know, even though I hadn't ever seen this movie properly, I knew that was coming. But I was kind of like watching it, through kind of fingers slightly, like, oh no, it's going to happen.
Yeah,
sure enough,
you kind of couldn't.
Compound fracture. It's like, oh, lovely. He's like, blah.
And that's kind of the thing that makes me think this is like that Halloween film. It is that there's a few jump scares, but not loads. It's mainly about, like, it's more of a gory Halloween film, isn't it? A disgusting and a sort of, oh my god, if that could happen
scary
to me kind of thing.
Yeah, it's not scary, but it's it's
gory,
definitely. And the comedy,
there is the closest.
Yeah, the comedy gore kind of, I don't know if they, I don't know if it was intended to be a little bit funny at times back then, or if it is just a little bit funny now because of the way we look back on this film. But there are moments where you kind of smile at how gory it is, but maybe that's just your human instinct when you're watching a horror film of this ilk. I'm not sure.
I think there's something wrong with Smith, right?
I was going to say, I didn't smile at all.
Did you not?
No, I was like, this is grim.
Yeah, I was like, and a lot of it stands up. Nearly all of it stands
heading into a therapy session before he knows it.
Yeah, just like but yeah, just
I would say the closest they come to a jump scare, and it's a great little moment, was where you first see him starting to transform a lot more, where Geena, he calls it Geena, that was like, come and see me, they haven't spoken in weeks, and she comes in and she's like, hello, and he kind of enters from the left of frame close up. You see the back of him, and he's like, stop, and she's like, oh, she reacts, and then you see him kind of walk out of the shadows.
There is another jump scare when she goes to, like, the doctors, essentially, because she's potentially pregnant with his baby, and he jumps through this, like, glass window. I'd say that bit actually made me jump, because I'd forgotten that bit actually happened.
We need your help. We are looking to grow Off Radar and release more and more high quality content. Please give us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your pod. And why not share with your friends and loved ones?
Help me help you.
Yeah, can I add a Bobby Tubbs question in on this? So he actually asked this question. I think we're kind of there, but I'd be interested to get your kind of yes or no's on this point. So he said, I suspect this was the best that practical effects had to offer at the time, but does The Fly stand up Or, like many others, has it dated to the point where scenes that would have once horrified us are now more like comedy? I guess maybe that's my point at some points, but
I thought it stood up brilliantly. Like, I can, I'm someone who grew up in the 80s, like we all did, watching those kind of movies. And sometimes you watch some of these films, it's like, oh, that really does look like an effect. Like, we've said before, I think, or maybe we didn't, but when you've seen RoboCops, not, RoboCop, there's a few scenes where you see Murphy. I think it might more be in the deleted scenes. I think it's when he gets his head shot off, and it's clearly a creation. Like, it's not him. Or Total Recall, for instance. Total Recall has moments where you see the face, or Running Man, where you have like these beautifully created special effects of Arnie's face, but you can tell it's not that. With this, obviously, they don't have to worry about, we've got to make a Jeff Goldblum puppet. But I thought the effects stood up beautifully, like especially when towards the end they're having the confrontation and Geena Davis like pulls off his jaw and then he slowly turns like
is
bits start pulling.
incredible.
That's incredible.
It's so
That's
good.
I mean, like, you see it. And can I just say, like, this is jumping massively ahead, but somehow when he emerges after he merges with the pod and it's crawls out, I found myself like, and it's the genius of the writing and the acting and the structure of the film. I really felt sorry for this putrid-looking creature like crawling up to her, and she's like, "No, I can't do it." And then the scene where he holds the gun to his head, and you look into those like terrifying eyes and all the bits coming off of him, and you're like, "Oh." Because it's like under all of that, there is still this human being that's trapped.
Condemned.
All he was trying to do was condemn. Oh, what a beautiful word! Like condemn. He was trying to do something good for the world. But to kind of go back to Bobby's point, I think the effects stand up beautifully. I think you could do nowadays CG and stuff, and it'll be. But there's something raw about this, and I think that's the key. And that's a lot of those 80s effects. Is sometimes with the CG, as we saw with a lot of the Star Wars stuff, when Lucas went in and started changing everything, it just loses a bit of that raw filmmaking quality that you get. And I think with this, I was just like, wow, I was kind of thinking like this is going to be a bit lame. But I think also what helps is the slow transition that you've talked about, Smith, where we go from him, he must go about through like, I reckon 6 or 7 makeup changes where he just gets more and more, and then he's like this really kind of weird creature who, as Nigel says, doesn't have a penis, but he's still part man. But I thought the effects were fantastic. Like the makeup, the creatures, and there's the bit when he's puking out the acid kind of stuff on the blood, and there's clearly like a puppet version that's able to throw up, but it looked great, and I had to go back and go, is that the puppet one? Because I thought it was fantastic.
Well, yeah, I'd love to jump in on this point. Like, for me, in the 80s, you go back to 1982, and The Thing, I think, was like the quintessential film where the special effects stand up. Now, on that, there's less of kind of like a human element of actual. I think there's one where like the head starts to come off after he's like chomped in the electric shock, what do they call it? The heart shocker type thing. But I think. Also, as well, you think about kind of Rick Baker's stuff and American Werewolf in London as well. Like, there's some amazing stuff in there. And again, all practical effects. With this film, I think there's about, as Etox said, 6 or 7 different versions of like the Brundle fly. Yeah. And there were some that didn't even make it to the film. They kind of went back and looked at the footage and thought, you know what, this just doesn't work. And I think the kind of, almost the end one, he looks like this almost like puffy, pink. It's like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man if he was pink and slightly freaky. It kind of goes a little bit like that, and I'd say that's the only period where you're a bit like, okay, it's not great, but it still kind of works, because again, you don't know what it would actually look like, and it's almost like that cocoon phase when he does, just before he turns into almost like a fully functional fly, which is bizarre in itself. But I think certainly the slow build-up of where you get the sort of hairs coming out of his back and stuff like that, it just looks really, really good. And we've mentioned the special effects with the compound fracture, the sort of the arm and the leg being sort of gooed off and stuff like that. I didn't find any of it where I thought, oh, this looks a bit cheap or a bit crap. I just thought it's a testament to the film, and I think a lot of it's to do with how sort of good the film is in terms of making you feel invested, that you're not thinking, oh, that's shit special effects. You just think, oh my God, it's awful what he's going through.
I think that is the key, isn't it, with this film? It certainly was with me anyway, that the fact that you are really invested in these characters and his transformation, because a lot of the film is set in the warehouse, you know, they don't leave loads and actually it kind of hinges on obviously Jeff Goldblum and the supporting cast, but yeah, even the moments where he pulls the fingernail off, which to me that's as impactful as the throwing up one, which is like absolutely grotesque. But this is something, you know, that I think everybody has a bit of a phobia of their fingernails being pulled off. But yeah, and then the hairs and stuff. I think I agree with you guys. I think it does hold up massively, and I think that is partly down to the effects just being so good, but also down to the effect that I just really love that build, the transformation of what he's going through. And at first you're like, oh man, he's actually becoming like quite cool. He's like a superhero. But then it kind of flips into this, you know, from going to this superhero into a complete mess, that, you know, actually playing with science and playing with, you know, like time and physics and everything that goes into it. Something's going to go wrong, and obviously all it took is a tiny little fly to climb in there with him. I wonder if the fly is like, man, what's happening to me?
That's the beautiful line, isn't it? That's the line in the movie where I was just like, that's the line in the movie I wrote down, where he says, it's where he's confronting her in the doorway, and he says, I'm an insect who dreamt he was a man and loved it, but now the dream is over and the insect is awake. And it's kind of like the fly now is the personality.
The dominant.
It's like, the dominant personality. I just thought it was such a great line, because it's like, this fly was just buzzing around wishing it was a man or whatever, and now it is, and, you know, now it's become the dominant personality. I just thought that was such a great thing.
Oh no, what's happening to me? Am I dying?
I want to know what's going on.
What does the disease want?
It wants to turn me into something else.
Oh no.
A fly got into the transmitter pod with me that first time when I was alone.
Don't go back to it.
Could be contagious.
So the special effects were done by a guy called Chris Wallace, and he actually won Academy Award for this. He also did a bunch of stuff on Gremlins, which is another film we've talked about, so go back to the previous pod.
Another Christmas one.
Exactly.
Although this is Halloween.
Yeah, well, it's all about the holidays and crazy special effects, apparently.
And I guess, kind of a link in, I guess. Jeff Goldblum's character Seth and Veronica.
Brundlefly.
They obviously are together. They have sex. And I think one of the most shocking moments is when she obviously finds out that she's pregnant. And
there's that scene.
The dream
I honestly didn't want us to talk about that.
So you know it's a dream sequence, I think. Well, I did. Like,
I didn't.
Did you not? Oh, okay. And she's basically giving birth, and this giant maggot comes out.
Yeah. Horrific.
And it's really, really horrific, like you say. And then there is this underlying, like, kind of abortion, because she's going to basically try and get rid of it. There is this, like, underlying abortion debate, which obviously in some countries we're still having even today. And I think she says something like, I'll do it myself, as if to say, well, you know, if we can't do it safely and properly, she'll do it herself. But anyway,
the terror of potentially giving birth to a deformed sort of fly-like creature. And to be fair, they did a sequel a few years after this.
Son of the Fly.
Well, it was just called The Fly 2, but essentially it is about the Son of the Fly. And Geena Davis was potentially going to come back to it, but didn't bother, because she basically gets killed off straight away, spoiler alert, giving birth to like this weird, almost like cocoon, which then hatches a baby. And it's just very bizarre. But yeah, it's a pretty horrifying scene. And in that scene as well, the sort of person who delivers the baby is actually David Cronenberg.
So
he's like
I did not know that.
And this ties into a bit of early trivia as well. So after watching some of his earlier films, Martin Scorsese, who we love in this podcast, asked to actually meet David Cronenberg. And upon meeting him, he said he looked a bit like a Beverly Hills plastic surgeon. And that inspired Cronenberg to give himself a cameo as a doctor. So there you go. You can blame Scorsese. And this kind of ties into another point I was going to raise about this film. Outside of like the three leads, essentially, so you've got obviously old Brundle Fly, you've got Geena Davis, and you've got sort of the jilted ex-lover. There's no other real character that has a huge amount of impact or even that much screen time in this film. It's a story that's predominantly about those three, and really you would say predominantly about the main two, the relationship.
Mainly those two. I mean, he comes back into it near the end, but the third guy
doesn't leave with all of his parts either. So
but even that, like, you would say it's not it's mainly those two throughout the whole film, and you could argue that a lot of scenes are mainly just him. She's not in it, I guess, loads, but interesting how they do that throughout this whole film and keep that suspension, tension, and they don't make it go, I'm going to say this sounds really weird, they don't make it go silly, because he doesn't like escape and then they have a massive great firing squad run down the street in New York or something like that, which we're used to in kind of horror-y, thriller-y type films. It still keeps it in a simple setting with the two of those at the heart of the story, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's something that could have kind of been this overblown set piece and stuff like that. Yeah. And they really did avoid that. I guess the ending as well, there is like a gun in it. So there's that aspect, that sort of bit of danger and everything else. But no, I think they strike a really nice balance. And it's not even a particularly long film. It's an hour and a half. It's the sort of film these days you'd expect to kind of go on and like build the characters, do that. But they do a lot of it, like Cronenberg especially, like in the way he directs the film, does a lot with just simplicity, I think, to a certain extent. And just kind of that underlying theme of again, someone basically being trapped to their fate and going through this process of the metamorphosis to being almost superhuman, to being Superfly, to being Superfly Jimmy Snooker, to being just horrible and terrifying. And it comes together like this almost like big crescendo of devastation, I guess.
I'm going to chuck in another Bobby question here before we get to some more trivia, because it sounds like there's a lot. This is a really interesting one, and I feel like Etot's kind of touched on this on other episodes in different ways. But so Bobby asks, would a studio dare to make this movie today? The late 80s saw a production of a wealth of risky taking peculiar films, especially in the horror genre. If you consider Hellraiser, Nightmare on Elm Street, Beetlejuice as three examples, with bizarre ideas all made within a few years of each other. And then The Fly. Do we get the same breadth of creativity today? And if not, why not?
I think you maybe do a little bit on independent levels. And I think there was a spell, certainly within probably 10 years ago, where there was just this big push for just gore films, like the sort of Saw films and stuff like that, and ones about people getting mutilated. Yeah. But in terms of creative horror films that are less, I would say, as this film is less about the gore, more about the story, more about kind of like the realization. I don't think there's many films like this that would be made. And to be honest, as I sort of touched upon earlier, the fact that they had to go and get independent sort of funding through someone like Mel Brooks, that was the only way they got this made. I don't think it's necessarily down to the studio. And this is obviously, again, a remake as well. So there's kind of that idea of that can bring people into a film, and obviously they love a remake these days. But I think the fundamental point is that, films like this, I say, are difficult to get made at any time, and especially so now where everyone's just looking for the next big franchise or big thing. But who knows, maybe an indie film like this could spin up, but not something that's got, as Jeff Goldblum was at the time, like a well-known face, albeit not a leading figure, and directed by an up-and-coming director like Cronenberg.
Yeah, I don't think it gets made today, or if it does, it's just got too much bloody interference from studios and stuff. And I mean, filmmaking these days is unless it's like Nige touched upon, like a franchise or something like that, a lot of this shit just doesn't happen, because it's like, how can we turn this into 3 movies, or how can we do this, how can we do that? And you just hear these days of so many films biting the dust because how can we best turn this into? It's like, can we just make a film? No, we need to make something that can be expanded upon and monetize. It's all about monetization as well. That's what you've got to realize in the modern thing, because society and social media and everything and the consumption of media has changed so dramatically. Films like this are few and far between, and like Nigel says, there was an obsession 10 years ago with those Saw movies, the Hostel movies.
Hostel,
it was just fucking. It was like, maybe the first Saw was good. I mean, I enjoyed the first Saw, but after that, it was just gore for gore's sake. And they're still making these things. You do get the more kind of ghostly horror films.
Yeah, you do.
You found like a new. They've come to fruition, I'd say, over the last 5 years or so. A lot of those, like The Conjurings, and this, that, and the other. Although I've heard The New Exorcist is.
I've heard that's really bad.
What a surprise! But yeah, I just think I just don't think you get a film at this level with this kind of raw talent. And I think that's what I came away from this film thinking. It's a very raw film. You've got, a small set piece, as it were, as in the film, like we talked about, it's pretty much one location, Jeff Goldblum's apartment / lab. That's all you really see. You get the hospital and a bar but it's all very brief. It's all centered around this one location. Again, that's something you just wouldn't really get in a movie now. It's like, well, it needs to be against the backdrop of, New York City.
Oh, no, we need a scene in China so we can then release the film in China and stuff like that.
Nigel's not wrong either. That sounds cynical, but that's 100% right. That's what they do now. And it's that kind of stuff that's kind of killed a lot of filmmaking, unfortunately. But I just don't think you get this kind of raw, visceral movie. There you go, that's a good word. You don't get this kind of raw, visceral movie made because it's, also you'd get like, it'd be CG'd to hell, and I'm sure it would look good in places. But the key of this movie is, if you say it's a film about a man becomes a fly, the first thing you think is bzzz, and he's flying around bzzz, like zzz. They don't even go there, and that's the genius of it. It's the metamorphosis into this like unholy alliance, this twisted creature.
Yeah, what do you think, Smith?
No, I think I agree with both of you. I think the only place for that unfortunately, is if they remake it or reboot it, which is obviously what has happened.
You know what you're going to get.
With his examples, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and then they're obviously doing another Beetlejuice.
Right, so Evil Dead as well.
Exactly, so there's nothing potentially creative or original about that because we're so used to that. We're probably going to talk about this in a future podcast, but it has felt like we've in cinema in general there's not a lot of original content and creativity generally, let alone the horror genre. I do agree, like there was like a few years of like The Conjuring and a few, like there are good horror movies, the ghostly horror movies, but not of this kind of style or ilk, and maybe that's partly down to a phase, like you say, the gore movie, then the horror, then the kind of ghostly one, then the more psychological one. So
I mean, it happens in cinema. There's definitely, we've obviously seen the Marvel stuff. There was the year of the westerns. There was sort of those kind of like swanky crime drama type things. We go through ups and downs, but yeah, quality horror is difficult. It's really,
as far as your question, would a studio dare to make this movie today as if it had never been made? No, I don't think they would. I think it's too much of a risk, isn't it? Give us some trivia then, Nigel. I mean, I feel like you've kind of been giving us little scatters of trivia throughout, but
I've been sprinkling it in. Yeah, I've always got more. So we always seem to talk about casting decisions in these, and lo and behold, Robin Williams. No, it's nothing to do with Robin Williams.
I would love to.
But I mean, there were some really interesting people. Apparently, the first choice was John Malkovich. But he turned it down, as did John Lithgow, who I think did work with Cronenberg at some point. But
sounds right.
But yeah, Michael Keaton as well, and Richard Dreyfuss turned it down because simply he just didn't want to be under all those prosthetics. Whilst Jeff Goldblum was just like, yeah, I'll do whatever. Like, I'm happy. Again, he wasn't like a supremely successful actor. He was well known. He was in Invasion of the Body Snatchers and stuff like that. But yeah, he certainly hadn't sort of had his big breakthrough. And on the sort of the female casting side, where Geena Davis came in, and as we mentioned, her relationship with Jeff Goldblum helped with that aspect. originally first choice was Linda Hamilton off the back of Terminator, but she turned it down after reading, surprise, surprise, the giving birth to a maggot scene. So I think maybe that would give you the heebie-jeebies a little bit, but yeah. In terms of other trivia, there's actually one person I missed out on this list of who could have been the Brundlefly. Pierce Brosnan apparently was. I think Pierce Brosnan was also Mel Brooks' first choice for the role. I cannot imagine Pierce Brosnan in this role. So yeah, but there were a couple of alternative endings as well. So what I would say about this film is the ending is. Well, I almost into review territory. It's quick, but it's brilliant. It just leaves you with this sense of just like, wow, like to just have the balls to finish it like that. But there were happier endings.
Was there before you go there? Was there an ending where they have a baby and then there's like a little, like a little wink, like, oh, there's something wrong with this baby. Maybe it's.
So there kind of was. There was a dream of basically this unborn child, and she has a baby with beautiful butterfly wings. And then she wakes up to realise she's still pregnant and it's left kind of in the open. And then there was another one. In fact, there was multiple endings. There was one where she's having a nightmare being confronted by Status, who's the guy, obviously her jilted ex. One version states that the baby is his, and the other that it just died. And Jeff Goldblum admits that he was really pissed off the fact they even filmed these endings, as felt like the idea of Veronica ending up with Status completely undermines the tragedy of the film. But yeah, in the end, they basically said, you know what, once your hero's dead, and they did consider Brundlefly the hero, the movie's over, and that was it. That's where they wanted to kind of cut it off. And I think, to be honest, for me, it was the right choice. I can't imagine what they could have done. And we saw it from The Fly 2 as well. Like, The Fly 2 was a box office bomb. It wasn't particularly well reviewed either.
Is that Eric Stoltz?
Eric Stoltz, yeah. So the fact that they sort of had the baby and it did turn out to be... I think the plot of The Fly 2 is he's kind of like almost like a super baby, grows really quickly, has some of those sort of abilities that we see with Jeff Goldblum's character early before he really becomes full Fly. But yeah, it just didn't really work. Although I think Cronenberg did want to do a sequel to this and he never got round to it because couldn't quite find the funding. Again, going back to Bobby's question about could this film be made again? Well, certainly the sequel couldn't. And then the last bit of trivia is to do with a bit of the old makeup and various bits. So the hand and foot that gets melted off and sort of burned off, or whatever you want to call it. So the actor, John Getz, claimed he kept one of the prosthetic feet in his freezer for years, and sort of people in the neighbourhood, little kids, would come round almost visiting daily just to see it. And then the arm with the melted hand, he actually turned into a base of a lamp. So there you go. So he's still got the foot and the hand in his home. So what a lovely place to keep it.
Wow, there you go.
Joyful.
Good trivia. I mean, I didn't think that was coming, but there you go. Okay, so what do we think and what are our ratings? Bobby, as you suggested this, you started it, you can tell us what you think. So Bobby has written, I rewatched The Fly and would personally give it a solid 7.5 out of 10. Although this score is probably a bit skewed by nostalgia, and I'll be first to admit there are a couple of clunky moments. Be afraid, be very afraid. That line has a strong smell of a marketing team round an 80s boardroom table. I believe it was the tagline for the poster. Sigh. The central performances are decent. There's the all-important chemistry between Seth and Veronica, which convincingly moves through the phases from playful, getting-to-know-you banter into something more meaningful. This in turn makes Seth's descent into the Fly harder to watch as we experience Seth through Veronica's eyes. 2 leaps of faith are required for you to enjoy this movie. 1, you have to buy into the concept of teleportation being possible. And 2, you have to believe the makeup and creative effects are real, or real enough to affect you in some way. Admittedly, the final Fly creature hasn't aged as well as I had hoped. However, I'm still glad this was made when the CGI equivalent wasn't feasible, as we would have ended up with something Marvel-esque. Instead, we have a film of a simple, practical and gritty aesthetic representative of its time. Etok, what did you think? After watching it today.
After watching it today for the very first time, although I knew bits and pieces about it, my review is kind of oddly short. Yeah, it's. I thought the pace of the movie was great. Like Nigel said, nice short movie. You come straight in with the characters, and like the film ends with the death of the main character. I couldn't believe how quick that ending was, but it was perfect. We don't need a slow pan out to a matte painting or anything like that. It was just give us the end of the movie.
Or 5 years later, see where they are then. Yeah.
The casting, like Bobby touched upon, the chemistry is great between Geena Davis and Jeff Goldblum. I kind of like that it feels like a small movie with this grand plot. A small movie in the sense of it just takes, but it felt at times, it's going to sound weird, like a TV movie, like a made-for-TV movie. I know I've used that before on the podcast, but it's just set in a solitary location with very few actors. That to me, I mean, reeks of independent. It's an independent film, but it just feels very small and insular, and that's what we want. Like I said, we didn't want him turning into the full, flyman and flying around the city with army guys following him and jets and explosions and stuff. We just want it to be quite insular. I think that's the strength of the movie. It feels a very intimate movie. It's not like made for. He's not on TV being interviewed as a fly. I know they do the recordings and stuff, but it feels like a small movie with an epic plot. I guess that's the best way to put it. But yeah, there's not much I can fault about it, to be honest. I was going in thinking, the effects are going to be dated. I didn't think they were at all. I mean, you've got like two fantastic actors in Geena Davis and Jeff Goldblum, and yeah, I just really enjoyed it. Yeah, I mean, like maybe the only thing you could criticize is some of the dialogue, but it works in the context of the movie, I think. So yeah, I think I'm actually going to agree with Bobby and give this a 7.5 out of 10.
Nice.
There we go.
Nige, what did you think?
Well, this is one of those films that when it got suggested, I was like, okay, yeah, great, I'll go back and watch this. And then I started thinking, okay, some of the films I go back and watch I don't enjoy as much, and it's almost one of those you want to leave in the original wrapping. You don't want to take it out just in case. But yeah, like it's a film that I remember, and again, there's a big nostalgia aspect to this. I remember being really enjoyable. The leads I really like in pretty much everything they've ever done. So again, getting a chance to kind of revisit that. And as I mentioned at the start, Cronenberg being a director I really respect, and was surprised by the running time. I think the film itself is, you mentioned that the dialogue being a bit clunky. I kind of picked up some of the bits that I really enjoyed. Like the chemistry between them is really strong. There's a little bit of humour, like the eccentricity of Goldblum's character when he meets like the girl in the bar after he wins wins by knockout, I would say, the arm wrestling contest. She asks him, "Are you a bodybuilder or something?" And he just goes, "Yeah, I build bodies." And it's kind of like, oh yeah, I see what you're doing there. You build the bodies when you transport them. It was just like really teleport them, rather. It was just really sort of nice and cute how that kind of got thrown in. But yeah, it's one of those stories that I think you do get invested in, that for some people maybe the gore detracts from what's actually going on, but for me, I just think, again, it's Cronenberg style, and it fits really well. And I really like this film. I've always liked this film, and watching it again, it was just, yes, I'm glad I got a chance to watch this again. And for that reason, I'm actually going to give it a 9 out of 10.
Oh, wow.
Because I am a big fan of The Fly. So there you go.
Wow, 9.
Nice. It's a good one.
That is a good one. Yeah, I kind of echoing what you guys and Bobby says, really. Like, I mean, I hadn't seen this for, a long time. I wouldn't say I have any kind of nostalgia for the film, but it does feel weirdly kind of nostalgic. And that is kind of obviously down to the time it's made, but also the feel that Cronenberg sets up with the pacing and the drama. And then I think, the key for me in this film is Jeff Goldblum as transformation, and I think not just from a kind of look, but from a kind of physical and acting point of view, and I think it's done so well. I did forget how kind of horrible and grotesque it was in places, and that kind of surprised me. And like you say, Nigel, I can imagine that being too much for some people, and I totally appreciate why. Some people will like want to turn that off straight away. But yeah, for me, like it feels like weirdly refreshing seeing this film again, because I haven't seen a kind of a horror stroke thriller drama romance. Was that what you said at the beginning? Yeah, but you've kind of he's blended all those things together and given it real depth and personality into what is, on paper, quite a ridiculous idea, but it works, and it really works very well. I don't have a lot to kind of criticise it for either, but I think I'm kind of landing probably with Etok and Bobby and going for a 7.5. I think, yeah, solid film, but probably not like an amazing film for me, if that makes sense. Man, I'm so sorry about my voice, boys. It's gone into Pepe.
I think you may have swallowed a fly.
Yeah, I might have swallowed a fly tonight. And guys, what do you think of The Fly? Trying to think of did it take off for you? Or did it buzz you up?
Did it shit all over your...
Yeah, I was going to say, did it soar to the heights or like regurgitate itself over your face?
Over your mum.
Your penis, which is now in a
Get in touch. Email us on offradarpod@gmail.com. X us. Is that what it's called now? X us at Off-Radar Podcast.
Yeah, don't say that. Like, Musk is going to kill the internet anyway, but I think they call it zeeting.
Do they really?
E-E-T. I've seen it called that. Zeet.
Tweet us at Off-Radar Podcast. Follow us on Facebook. We're on YouTube as well, so you can watch our voices but not actually see us. And get in touch and give us another film to watch next time. And happy Halloween.